This was back in 2022. I'd been looking for extra ways to make money on the side and had downloaded DoorDash, thinking I'd try it out. I got accepted and had it all ready for me to start working, but I didn't finally decide to try making some deliveries until 3 weeks later. I just kept pushing it off. It was a night after getting home from work where I was just bored but not yet tired and thought there was no better time than now to test it out. The first few orders, I was still getting the hang of things, but they all went well. I felt confident after that, as it was a pretty simple process. It was around 3 hours in, and I think just past 12 a.m., when an order popped up that was different from all the rest. It had a massive estimated tip of something like $30 to $40. That was just about as much as I made in the last 3 hours of working. I didn't even think twice before quickly accepting the order. It was from a 24/7 McDonald's, the only one in our whole town. It was right on the edge of the highway that led out of town and into what I considered to be the middle of nowhere. Once I picked up the order, I realized that was exactly where the order was taking me. I didn't make it 2 minutes down the road before getting a call from the DoorDash customer. He sounded older than me, like maybe in his 30s, and he didn't seem to be in a good mood as he told me to confirm the address. A little confused, I just read off the address the app was taking me to. After I said it, there was a pause. The man didn't say anything. I was gonna ask if it was correct or not, but he hung up right away without saying a word. I thought it was pretty odd that he was clearly in a bad mood and didn't respond to me, all while offering a huge tip as if he were a nice guy. Maybe it was because he wanted me to take extra care of his order, but even that seemed excessive. Whatever the case, I just kept driving. I was about 15 minutes away, but it felt like I was driving really far because of the road going directly away from town. There were some smaller, random neighborhoods here and there, but it looked like mostly empty farmland or single homes off the side of the road. As I kept driving, I got a strange, unsettling feeling about this delivery. Might have been from the unknown area, or the empty and foggy road, or the odd phone call, but I definitely felt like something was different about this order. Pulling off the road and onto the dirt driveway didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't see much through the dense fog, but I was driving through a tall grass field with no vision of what was at the end. I drove slowly until finally getting to the house. It was sitting by itself in the middle of the field, one of those old farm-looking houses with a large wraparound porch and wooden accents. Lights were on in the windows, and I could see that the large address numbers matched the address I had on the order. I parked and got out with the food, beginning to walk up to their front door. It was hard not to notice how quiet it was out there. No sounds whatsoever, except for the slight breeze cutting through the tall grass. I didn't even hear anything inside the home, like a TV or people talking. I went to knock on the door, and on the first knock, the door creaked open, like it wasn't fully closed. Immediately, a man's voice called out from the back of the house. It was the same guy from the phone. He asked if I was the DoorDash driver. I said yeah, and that I would just leave his order right here on the porch. But the guy quickly responded and asked if I could set it down inside on the countertop in the kitchen. Again, I noticed he sounded pretty upset, or just in a bad mood for some reason. I took a few steps inside. The house had the smell of old wood, kind of musty, like it wasn't very clean. Within a couple seconds, the man suddenly turned on music. It came from the back, right where I heard his voice come from. It was this old piano song, and was really loud. It kind of freaked me out.
Sir?
I called out.
Hello?
He wasn't responding anymore. I started to feel like maybe this wasn't worth it, even for the tip he offered. Everything just wasn't feeling right. Like, why the hell did he just start blasting piano music while I was walking into his house, and just stop responding? Once I was closer to the end of the hallway where the kitchen was, I could see it getting darker. Like the other rooms next to the kitchen, notably the one I thought the guy was in, was fully dark. I stopped walking, dropping the bag on the ground and just hurrying back toward the front door. I nearly had a heart attack as right when I got close to the door, I saw the guy standing in the dark just a couple feet from it. I distinctly remember the whites in his eyes, almost glowing, as he stared at me with wide eyes. It was like I caught him in the act of something. That split second felt like it lasted minutes, and even thinking about it now, I could have sworn there was something in his hands, but I never directly looked at it, so I can't say for sure what it was. Before anything could happen, I sprinted outside, got in my car, and drove through the fog back to the road. I'm certain, from the way the guy was standing, he was trying to sneak to the front door, probably to close and lock me inside with him. Now that I think about it, that probably explains the music, muffling the sound of him creeping through the house as I walked down the hallway. That night, I deleted the app and never looked back. I definitely made some questionable decisions that I'm not proud of, but I don't think I deserved whatever that guy was going to do to me had I been just a few seconds late and been locked inside with him. My name is Maxine, and at the time I was 23 and just moved to a new town to be closer to my parents. I didn't want to live in the city though, which was where they lived, so I chose a smaller town just an hour north. I really knew nothing about it before moving, but my parents said most of the places close to the city were decent, and this town had good prices for apartment rentals. Prior to moving, I was bouncing between jobs, never really finding the perfect fit for me. After getting settled into the apartment and new town, I quickly started looking for job openings. I didn't have much saved up, so I couldn't be too picky. One of the first listings I found was for a local grocery store. Definitely not a chain store, as I'd never heard of the place. I think it was just owned and run by a single family. I did actually used to work at a grocery store for a couple of years in high school, so I applied, hoping my previous experience would help me get the job. Within a few hours of submitting my application, I got a call from a man named John. I wasn't expecting such a quick response, but John just asked a few basic questions and basically said I was hired without the need to come in and do an interview. I will say, on the phone call, he was a little strange. I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was about him or the way he talked, but I don't know, it just gave me a weird feeling. There was one catch to the job though, and that was that they were only hiring for a night shift stocking position. I'd never done night shifts before, and I wasn't sure how I'd like it, but in this small town I didn't have many options for jobs, so I figured I'd give it a go. My first day was 3 days after the phone call. I made sure to bring in all the stuff I needed paperwork-wise, then left my apartment at 9:30. The store closed to the public at 9, so by the time I got there, the lot was completely empty, and basically all the lights were off. I headed up to the entrance. John was standing right against the front doors, watching me as I walked up, and opening the doors for me to welcome me in. John was pretty tall, about 6'2" if I had to guess, and not very skinny either. He had a buzz cut and a thick beard. To start the night, he walked me to the office room in the far back to handle all the paperwork. As we walked through the store though, I noticed it was a little bit janky. Like the aisles were a bit too dirty and looked very old, and it just wasn't the typical grocery store I was used to. I thought it could have been how the average small town stores were though, so I tried to not put too much thought into it. When we got to the office, and while John was looking over the paperwork, he made small talk, but some of the questions he asked were a bit unusual. He started by asking about my move into the town, but then began asking about whether I lived alone, or if someone drove me here, or was planning to pick me up later. I answered, but tried not to be too specific because I did find it weird. John kept a very wide smile throughout the whole conversation, which didn't match his appearance at all, and it felt unnatural in this really strange sense. Finally though, after leaving my bag and stuff in the office, we got to work. He showed me to an aisle where he had some carts of boxes for me to stock, and left me to it. This was pretty straightforward work, so I got to it. The first hour or so went by without much to say. I did realize pretty quick though that it was only me and John here, no other workers. I wouldn't have thought it to be an issue. However, I started to notice John peeking around the corner a few times and just watching me, I guess. I'd just look up randomly and catch him standing at the end of the aisle, somewhat staring at me. He'd be standing there as if he were there for a few minutes too, not just walking by. But without saying anything, he'd walk away as soon as I saw him. I tried to tell myself he was just catching up on his new employee, but why wasn't he saying anything, or just asking how I was doing? Something was really starting to creep me out about this new manager of mine, and honestly, I was debating if I even wanted to keep this job after tonight. Things just felt off about this whole place. But I told myself I could make that decision later. I just had to get through this shift. I was a little extra aware of my surroundings for the next little bit. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I saw John again, standing at the end of the aisle and looking at me. But once I noticed him, he started walking toward me with that unnatural smile.
What do you say we take our 15-minute break now? It's been a long night of working.
I agreed, but didn't realize he meant we'd take our breaks together. He led me to the far back of the building, where there was this heavy metal door leading outside. He opened it and gestured for me to come out with him. This was behind the building, where the store receives deliveries, and there was a small parking lot that had a single car in it. I assumed it was John's car, but as soon as we stepped out, that car turned on and drove away. John pulled out a cigarette and leaned against the back of the building. I wasn't really sure what to do here. Like, I wanted to go back to the break room, if they had one, and just eat the lunch that I brought in peace. But also, it was my first day, so I felt like I had to make a good impression. I stood there next to him. It was really awkward. I was looking forward at the trees past the parking lot, not sure what to say or do. But I could feel John's eyes next to me, staring at me, as he didn't say anything either. It was the most uncomfortable situation I'd ever been in. Then, after a good minute of standing there in silence, a car came driving back around the building. It was the same one that was parked and had just left a minute ago, but they didn't pass by us. The car started slowing down, pulling right up in front of us. As it did, I glanced over at John, gauging if he noticed this was weird too. But he had this cold stare, looking right at me, as if he didn't even care about the car pulling up to us. I started thinking this was some sort of setup that John might be in on. It was just a gut feeling, based on the way John wasn't reacting. Before the car was even able to fully stop, I hurried back through the door. I rushed through the back of the warehouse toward the office, where I left my bag with my wallet, keys, and other stuff I brought. When I got to the office though, everything was gone. My bag, my keys, and even my jacket that I hung up. It was like I was never there. I heard multiple pairs of footsteps coming through the halls, so I had to just run for it. I ran down to the front and out of the building. The nearest place that was open was a gas station I remembered passing by a few minutes down the road. I ran all the way there, getting them to call the police. I will say, once I was out of danger, there was a small part of me that thought I might have been overthinking and overreacting about a big misunderstanding. But my doubts quickly went away when police got to the grocery store and were allowed to question John and take a look around. They found my bag, jacket, and everything right in the office where I left it. John put it all back. Not only that, but he declined any cars ever pulled up to us. And when asked to review the cameras, the only one that wasn't recording was the one behind the building. pretty convenient. Overall, I couldn't prove anything, so the whole case died out. Of course, I got the hell out of that town, breaking my lease and crashing at my parents' place for a while, until I was able to get a steady footing. I don't know what was going on that night, or what would have happened. It seemed like John was trying to remove every trace of me ever working there, or even being there at all, and maybe had something horrible planned, but at least I didn't have to find out the hard way. I was 28, living alone in a small city after getting laid off from my longtime job. That job was the only reason I even moved to this city to begin with, so this was pretty devastating. I really wasn't sure which direction I wanted to go with my life, but while I tried to think about things, I figured I'd get any job I could, just to pass the time. After a few weeks of searching, I got an offer from a small motel on the edge of the city. I went in for a few short days of training, but this happened on essentially my first full night alone at the motel working the counter. This motel was a pull-off on the highway, about 30 minutes outside the city. There wasn't anything else out here. The only other building was an abandoned restaurant next to the motel. Through the first few hours of the night, a couple customers came in. They got a room and I checked them in, and that was about it. A lot of the customers looked the same, tired and in need of rest, but one lady stood out to me. She looked really tired too, but she kept looking over her shoulder and was really rushing to get a room. Wasn't sure what that was about, but I only interacted with her for maybe a minute, then she went to her room. Then there was a long time where I was alone. I just sat behind the counter, staring out the doors at the empty highway. Barely any cars even passed by, so I figured the night would be really slow. That was until a man walked in. I never saw his car pull into the motel, so I thought he must have been a customer that had checked in earlier before my shift had started. However, he made it clear right away that that wasn't the case. He asked how much the rooms were, and if any were available.
Yeah, we have plenty of rooms. Did you want me to check you in for one tonight?
He looked like he thought about it for a second, but his eyes kept glancing beside me. Eventually, he responded no thanks and walked out. After he left, I looked over my shoulder, trying to figure out what he kept looking at. The only thing over there was the key wall. That's what I called it anyway. Basically, it was just a bunch of pockets holding the keys to the rooms. This was an old-fashioned place, not having the fancy key cards that all the hotels have nowadays. Anyway, when he walked out, I kept my eyes on the door, wondering if I'd see his car drive away, but I didn't. I thought it was extremely weird because there was almost no way he walked here. He would have had to walk along the side of the highway at night for a stretch of probably 10 miles from the nearest place, which was just a gas station. After a minute, I walked over to the door and looked out at the parking lot. It was very quiet. Only the few cars from the previous customers were in the lot, and the man was nowhere to be seen. With nothing else out there, I closed the door and went back behind the desk. The night was going by very slow, and because it was my first night alone, the owner told me to just focus on check-ins and check-outs, and didn't give me anything else to do. A half hour went by, when the sudden desk phone ringing startled me. I quickly picked it up, seeing it was one of the rooms calling. A woman's voice came through. She was clearly in distress as she explained that someone was standing outside her door and wouldn't leave. I quickly got up, and immediately when getting outside, I could see that whoever it was, they weren't there anymore. I hurried up to the woman's room, which was on the far end. When she answered, she looked really nervous. I asked if she knew the guy, or if he said anything, and apparently the man didn't speak at all. She saw him outside her window and asked him to leave, but the man wouldn't, and that's when she called. When the woman described him, though, I immediately knew who she was talking about. It was the guy from earlier. She described him exactly as I remembered he looked like. Kind of tall, and really dead-looking eyes. Now, I asked her if she wanted me to call the police, but she was very adamant about me not calling authorities, saying she didn't want to deal with any of that and was leaving in the morning anyway. She just wanted me to tell them to leave if I saw them. So that was it. I went back to the main room. For the next 2-ish hours, I thought a whole lot about the situation. Like, what was the guy doing here anyway? And why was he standing outside the room? I thought he might have been drunk, though when he came in earlier, I didn't get that feeling. Whatever the case, in the middle of the night, I suddenly heard some commotion. It sounded like a bunch of stuff getting knocked over and thuds against the walls that radiated through the whole motel. I quickly ran out the door. From there, I saw the woman's door at the end was wide open, and the noise was coming from inside her room. I ran over. Looking through the doorway, I could see the woman being cornered in the room, with the man standing in front of her, blocking her from leaving. I yelled, but I was so full of adrenaline, I don't even know what I said. He instantly turned around and looked at me. His face was full of anger, and his eyes were bloodshot. After seeing that, I was terrified. He came barreling toward me, and I just backed out of the doorway, but he ran straight past me. I saw him run out into the highway, and then disappear into the woods on the other side. I quickly made sure the woman was okay, and thankfully I'd gotten there before he'd been able to do anything to her. I then went back to the office and called 911. Turned out, after the man was standing outside her door, he went around the building and into the front room while I was checking on her, and he stole the spare room key from the wall. But it also turned out the woman lied to me. She knew that guy. It was her ex-husband that she was actually running away from, which was why she needed to stay at the motel, and probably why she was so on edge. She said he was pretty unhinged and had violent episodes. I guess earlier when I asked if she wanted me to call the police, she lied, hoping he would just go away without making things complicated. I'm not really sure, to be honest. That night was definitely one to remember though, and not in a good way. I can't help but think how things could have gone differently, or what would have happened if he didn't just run away. Who knows what he was capable of. Surprisingly, I kept the job and stayed there for a few months, but it got really uncomfortable having to deal with really strange people pretty much every night, so eventually I got out when I could. For the last several years, I've lived a normal life in the city. It's where I stayed pretty much all day, every day. I owned a condo just a couple miles from where I worked, so everything was very convenient, and there was no reason to leave the area. This week, however, I had a couple issues with my condo that were starting to really bother me, and hiring someone to fix them would have been way overpriced. But I had no tools myself. So to save as much as possible, I went on Craigslist to see if anyone was selling some second-hand toolkits. It was about time I get one anyway. Surprisingly, there were a ton. Some were worse deals than others, but I just needed some basic stuff, so I kept looking until I found something that seemed decent. A lightly used toolkit with everything I needed, for a respectable price. I sent an email, and within just 15 minutes, we were set to meet up. The guy said that I could come by his place and pick it up tomorrow, whenever I was available. I worked until 7, but I usually like to stay up anyway, so I was good with it. His address was pretty far though, at least for me. It was 45 minutes outside of the city, in a very small town that I somehow had never heard of. On the satellite view of maps, it looked like just 100 or so houses clumped up in one area. Come the following day after work, I made the drive out of the city. The roads were pretty empty, and honestly kinda nice once I was away from all the buildings. It was well past sundown when I started getting close. It looked like mostly wooded areas with just a few gas stations and shops around. The neighborhood I pulled into was sketchy to say the least. All the houses were mixed in with the forest, and they were clearly very old. They looked like they had been there for over 100 years and really hadn't had any renovations. Some looked abandoned for sure. This had me a little put off as I continued through the wooded road and finally got to the address the guy sent me. It looked no different than all the rest of the homes, small, old, and barely standing. Although I felt a little uneasy about this neighborhood, it was in the back of my mind that I was very much from the city and wasn't used to places like this, so I thought it might have not been as bad as I was making it out to be. I parked on the end of the driveway and stepped out. Right away, I noticed how quiet it was. It was so quiet that it felt unnatural. No people outside, or sounds coming from any of the houses, or even cars driving by. Just dead silence. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. As I stood on the porch and waited, I had this strange feeling that made me keep looking behind me. But after a minute, the door opened. The guy that answered was about average height, with longish brown hair and an unkempt beard. He definitely didn't look the most put together. He showed me inside and over to the living room, where sitting on the couch, there was a thick tool bag holding all the tools that he was selling. One thing that made the whole situation feel more eerie was that there were basically no lights on in the house. There was only a single lamp in the living room that barely produced anything more than shadows. Also, as we walked into the living room, I noticed the back door by the hallway was hanging on its hinges, like completely broken in the doorway leading outside. I didn't exactly know what to look for when it came to the kit, but honestly, I just wanted to pay for it and leave. I pretended to look through it, but just pulled my cash out and turned around to hand it to him, when I noticed he wasn't there. The room was empty. Where the hell did this guy go? I called out for him, but the house was extremely quiet. There were slight creaks coming from the walls and floors all around the house, but I couldn't tell if it was just the old house settling or not. I felt my adrenaline spiking. I think my gut knew this was really bad. I called out one more time for him as I slowly made my way back to the front door, leaving the tools behind. Just when I got into the hallway though, someone was standing there. It was a different guy. I couldn't see him well because he was standing in the shadow, but I could tell he was noticeably taller and wider than the other guy.
I was just heading to my car to grab some money, if that's alright,
I said casually, hoping he'd just move out of the way and let me go. He didn't answer. The way he was standing was like he was intentionally blocking the hallway. I stood there trying to think of what to do, but just a second later, I heard a creak to my right. I turned my head. The room beside me was pitch black. If I had to guess, I think it was the kitchen, but it was honestly so dark in there that I couldn't tell. Somehow in that moment, my survival instincts just kicked in, and I sprinted to the broken back door I remembered seeing. As I ran out of the house, I heard several loud creaks that definitely sounded like footsteps running behind me. Thankfully, the house didn't have a fence, so I was able to just run right around and back to the front. As I was running back up to my car, someone jumped out from behind it and started running away. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew I had to leave, so I just unlocked it and got in, then floored it out of there. I was still under the adrenaline rush for a while after that. I'm pretty sure there were multiple people in that house, and that one of them was trying to either break into my car or prevent it from running so I couldn't get away. I can't say exactly what they intended to do, but if I didn't get out when I did, I'm not confident I ever would have. This wasn't all that long ago. It actually wasn't until after this happened that I even knew about the horrible encounters other people also had on Craigslist. I always thought it was relatively safe so long as you were cautious enough. Apparently, I didn't follow my own rules though. This was during the first month that I moved into my new home. It was a pretty long move across the country into a relatively new area for me. I sold almost everything before the move, so for the first little while, I would casually scroll through Craigslist whenever I was bored, hoping to find anything I might need. Mostly furniture, or just things to make the house feel less empty. Before this, I'd actually already found a few things on Craigslist and picked them up and had no issues at all, so I really didn't have much reason to be nervous. One night after work, I happened to scroll by a post of a fairly nice looking couch. It was almost perfect to what I was hoping to find. A gray sectional sofa that was apparently in great condition, and it was all for a decent price, $200. The guy responded pretty quickly. His name was Brian, and from the text, he seemed like a chill dude. We agreed on the price and started figuring out the plan to meet up. The big issue was that I only had an SUV. It could maybe fit one section of the sofa at a time, and he lived in the next town over, so I'd have to drive there and back multiple times just to get the whole thing to my place. When I mentioned that I didn't have a way to pick up the whole couch at once, he kindly offered to use his pickup truck to drop it off at my place. Of course, I ideally wanted to see it in person before buying it, and didn't feel too comfortable with giving some random guy my address, but it was just so much more convenient, and made a lot more sense to do it this way. And he wasn't pushy or weird about it in any way at all. He genuinely seemed like he was offering a solution. So after a bit of thinking it over, I agreed. We were set for him to swing by my place at 5:30 on the following day. I went to bed early, and in the morning I sent him my address, then spent the rest of the day cleaning the other rooms of the house. Once it got closer to 5:30, I stayed in the living room and watched TV, leaving the blinds partially open. Almost at exactly 5:30, I saw headlights coming down the road. A few seconds later, a black pickup truck slowly passed by. As they did, I noticed that there was no couch in the bed of the truck, so I figured it was just a neighbor or something, and continued waiting. However, just a few minutes later, that same truck passed by again. It was really strange the way they slowed down, like they were looking at my house, or maybe even through the windows, as they were passing by. Kind of just gave me an uneasy feeling, but I still figured it was nothing. I sent Brian a text, making sure he was still on his way, then continued watching TV. After I sent that text, I didn't see any more trucks passing by outside. Even more strange, though, was that Brian never texted me back. He never showed up, or even updated me on anything. At 6:30, an hour past when he was supposed to be here, I sent another text, only for it to not go through, meaning that he blocked my number. I didn't know what went wrong, but overall I wasn't too concerned, and more just bothered that he wasted my time. Maybe he found someone else who'd pay more, or something else came up, and he just didn't want to deal with giving me the bad news, so he ghosted me instead. It happens, I guess. As it got later into the night, I was mostly over it. I had dinner, set up my office room in the house, and chilled in bed watching YouTube for the rest of the night. I don't even remember falling asleep. I think I just passed out in the middle of a video, but I'm pretty sure I was out for at least a couple hours. I woke up in the middle of the night to a really unsettling sound. It was a long wooden creak, which I was absolutely sure was the front door creaking open. I knew it because it always bothered me, being the only squeaky door in the house. But who the hell just opened it? I sat up and stared toward my bedroom door as I listened. I could hear subtle footsteps moving into the house below me. I probably wouldn't have been able to hear them if not for the echo of the empty home. I felt myself start to panic, but I remained still, almost stuck in place. The footsteps seemed to stop as they reached the bottom of the staircase. Several long seconds of silence went by before a man's voice called out. Not just anything, though. He was calling out my name. His voice was deep and sounded like an older man, but I didn't recognize it as anyone I knew. He called out my name again. Disturbingly, there was no emotion behind it. He was monotone, just saying my name over and over from the bottom of the stairs, like he knew I was up here. I quietly reached for my phone to call 911. I was extremely scared that he'd hear me talking to the operator, but honestly, I felt like I had no choice. I whispered as quietly as I could. The man still stayed at the stairs, calling out my name. Once the cops were on the way, I moved from my bed to my closet. I didn't know if the man was actually going to come up to look for me or not. Clearly something was wrong with them, so I wasn't taking my chances. Only 30 seconds after I moved into the closet, though, the man's voice stopped calling out. From the closet, I couldn't really hear anything else, like footsteps or doors, so I got really anxious, unsure where he was, or if he could be right outside my bedroom right now. Fortunately, in a couple minutes, officers arrived. The house was empty. Whoever that guy was that came in, he was gone. I immediately told the officers about the Craigslist situation because I was sure it had to be Brian. I mean, I'd just given him my address that day and saw that truck suspiciously passing by earlier. I still had his phone number, so I felt confident they could track him down. But there were a few problems. When my messages weren't going through, it turned out it wasn't because he blocked me. It was because that number no longer existed. It was a dead line. There was no way to trace it back to him. And the second issue is that even if we figured out who he was, there wasn't any way to pin him for being the one that broke in. Still, I'm almost 100% sure it was the guy from Craigslist. I wonder if maybe he was planning to have me or whoever responded to his listing go to his place where he was more prepared to do whatever it was he was trying to do. But for some reason, he thought he could still follow through with it at my place by breaking in. Maybe he overestimated himself. I really don't know. It's also really strange that he stayed downstairs and just called out my name. Anyway, the cops said it looked like he picked the lock on my front door, so I replaced it and installed a camera. I didn't really have the option to move, so I'm trying to take any precautions necessary. Nothing has happened since. Every once in a while, I find myself looking through sites like Craigslist, eBay, and other similar ones for random things I might want or need. It was kind of like online thrifting, just something fun to do, and sometimes even got me great deals on stuff I wouldn't have bought otherwise. This was in 2018, so a pretty long while ago. I had found a few things on Craigslist that I was interested in. The listing showed a bin full of home decor, like candles and picture frames and just cute decorations for around the house. My apartment was pretty bare bones, so I thought a bunch of random decorations could liven up the place. I messaged the woman, April, and she was super kind. Basically, she said she was moving and wanted to sell off all the stuff she didn't want, or thought might break during the moving process. Her goal was just to get rid of it all, so she didn't mind selling them for dirt cheap. She said for $20 she'd be happy to let me pick out whatever I wanted, or even everything, if I wanted all of it. We agreed to meet at a nearby parking lot after she got out of work at 6 on a Thursday night. I got out of work at 5 that day, so I just went straight there from the office. The place we agreed on was a parking lot for a grocery store, which was pretty busy around that time. There were a bunch of people coming and going. I texted April what my car looked like and where I was in the lot, then just waited. It was the middle of winter, so I had the car blasting heat and was hoping she'd get here sooner rather than later. But I got a text just a few minutes after I got there, saying she was getting out late and was hoping I could possibly meet up closer to her. Obviously, this was a bit frustrating, but she seemed really sorry, and if it ended up saving both of us time, then I guess it wasn't too big of a deal for me to drive a little bit more. April sent over the address to another parking lot that was closer to her, so I just put the address into my GPS and started driving there. I hadn't been over to that side of town very much, so I wasn't sure exactly where it was taking me. The drive was about 15 minutes. Even though it was only about 6:30 when I got there, because it was winter, the sun had already set and it was fairly dark out. But what made it even more dark was that all the buildings in the parking lot had their lights off. Essentially, it was a small lot for an outdoor strip mall, but it was empty and nobody was there except for one car parked on the far edge near the end of the parking spaces. Something felt off about it as I pulled in. April mentioned she had a red Toyota SUV, which was the one car that was parked over there, so I drove over and parked just a few spaces away. The contrast between the busy public parking lot she chose before to now this deserted, empty lot was really strange. I told myself I'd just see how it goes, since I was already here, and if anything makes me feel too weird, I'd dip out. I got out and stood by my car, waiting for April to get out as well. I realized as I stood there, I couldn't see into her windows. They were maybe tinted, but also the lighting made it difficult to see through. But while I was standing out there in the cold, I started to feel increasingly less comfortable. I was only out there for maybe 15 seconds before I was about to decide to get back in and leave, when their door opened. But a man got out. He looked like he was in his 30s, with dark hair and a heavy, tan winter jacket. He quickly explained that April couldn't make it and was held up at work still, so he was here to give me the stuff from Craigslist. I thought this was super weird and that I would have gotten a text if that was the case. It felt like that information was hidden from me until I'd already showed up. In my hesitation to respond, he also mentioned that because all of the hassle, he'd let me take everything for free if I'd like. He smiled as he opened up the trunk and stepped back, motioning for me to come over and look. I didn't exactly know the best way to leave, but I was sure I was not going to go over there. Maybe if this were all in a more public place, I'd be less skeptical. But out there, where nobody else was around, I was really unsettled. I quickly started going back into my car, as I said I was just gonna call April really quick, just to make sure. His smile faded as I walked back and got my car. I opened my messages, then called April's number. A few seconds later, the muffled sound of a phone ringing came from outside. I looked over. He slowly reached into his pocket and ended the call. My stomach dropped. In an instant, he started hurrying up to my door as I turned my car on and sped out of there. I was almost sure that this was all a setup, and there never was anyone named April. It was likely that man behind it the whole time, just pretending to be an innocent woman selling decor in hopes to lure in other girls like me. I can only imagine what would have happened had I gone over toward the open trunk of his car. After that night, I called my sister to talk about what happened, and she told me to call the police, so I did. However, since nothing really happened, and there's technically no crime for pretending to be a girl named April, although suspicious, they couldn't do anything about it. To me, it's very clear this was a setup that likely had horrifying intentions behind it. I really just hope nobody else fell for it.
When I was younger and still living in the city, I moved apartments like other people would change clothes. It wasn't that I was getting evicted or anything, they were just these super cheap places. Always a few in classifieds or easy to bounce between if your lease was up or if you didn't like the neighborhood anymore. I didn't own too much either. Bed, couch, TV, some clothes. So packing up and leaving wasn't really that big of a deal. That lifestyle kind of fit me. Everything about it made sense at the time. I liked being close to the action. I liked that I could walk to a bar, hit a movie, grab food, all without needing to plan really anything. The last place that I lived before it all went bad was on the east side. right off this long boulevard that cut through a bunch of old brick duplexes. My apartment was a little bigger than the one before it. The floors were warped, the heater ticked all night like it was full of rocks, but it was mine. I moved in just as summer was ending. I remember dragging my mattress up the stairs and being drenched in sweat by the time I got to the top. There was this weird smell in the hallway too, kind of like old carpet with rotting fruit, but I figured I'll get used to it. You always do. The unit across from mine had its blinds drawn and a door scuffed to hell. I didn't think too much of it, just another tenant, right? The guy who lived there looked like he worked construction or maybe bounced at one of the bars. Shaved head, wide shoulders, sunburnt neck. He had a woman too, but I didn't really see much of her in the beginning. I just heard her. Well, I heard both of them. The fights escalated slowly, then all at once. First, it was raised voices, then crashes and thuds. I'd lie awake on my couch with the volume turned up just to drown it all out, but it always cut through. Him yelling like a man possessed, her begging like she was already half defeated. Sometimes I'd hear her out in the hallway, crying, late at night when I got back from the bar. Just her voice echoing off that brick night after night. The cops came twice. I called both times. They never stayed more than 10 minutes. One time I watched the peephole, saw the guy standing shirtless in the doorway, arms crossed, just nodding while one of the officers asked him a few questions. The second time they didn't even get past the front door. It was like they had this routine. Get in, calm things down, leave before the paperwork would start to pile up. I actually started sleeping with earplugs, but they didn't help. You can't drown out somebody being hit, and you can't unhear that slap, that wet, awful sound, or the silence that always followed it. Then came the night that I remember being the worst. It had been quiet for 2 days straight, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she finally left him. I got home around 7, made some pasta, and sat down to eat in front of the TV. Around 8:30, it started up again, a scream that cut through everything. And it wasn't just fear, it was panic, full body panic. I muted the TV, already standing up. He was yelling and stomping around. Then I heard something shatter. I heard her say, "Don't, please, don't do that again." And it sounded like somebody getting slammed into the wall. My wall. Didn't really think, I just acted. Grabbed my phone and called the police, again. I told them it's serious, that he actually might kill her this time. Somebody needed to come right now. They gave me the same answer as before. If nobody from that apartment called, their hands were tied unless I heard a weapon, whatever that meant. So I hung up and crossed the hall. No plan, just heat in my chest and a sick churn in my stomach. I knocked, no answer, just the muffled chaos inside. I pounded harder and the whole door rattled. This time it was ripped open and there he was. He looked taller in the doorway. He filled it even, shoulders so wide they cast a shadow far over me. His chest was bare, his stomach was heaving, and his face was soaked in sweat and wild-eyed with rage. His mouth was tight like he was chewing on broken glass. "What the fuck do you want?" he asked me. "Look, she's screaming, man," I said. "I already called the cops. Enough is enough." He stared at me, no blink, no twitch, and I realized just how close I was to him, only a few inches. I could smell the beer on his breath, the sweat soaking into his skin. "I'm not gonna say it again," I told him. "Let her go." And that's when it happened. He didn't say a word to me, didn't shout, just grabbed the front of my shirt and yanked me so far forward that my feet left the ground. I slammed into the hallway wall. Pain exploded in my ribs. I tried to push him back to get some space, but the fist came down and caught me clean across the jaw. I saw white and dropped. He kept coming though. I scrambled and crawled backwards down the hallway toward my own door. He landed a boot in my stomach. I coughed so hard that I thought my lungs were about to come up. He didn't stop either. Another punch caught me in the cheek. I hit the floor hard and rolled toward my door, everything spinning. Behind him, I just saw her, just a flash, standing in the doorway holding the frame, blood running from her nose. She screamed at me to run. Her voice was hollow though, like somebody that's already halfway gone. I got my key in the lock barely, yanked open the door, and staggered inside. He followed me, still swinging. I threw my weight against the door and managed to get it shut just long enough to drop the chain lock. He pounded on the other side, still yelling at me through the door. I slid down to the floor panting, spilling blood onto my tile. I thought it was over then, but he didn't go away. I sat there with my back up against the door, shaking uncontrollably. My left eye was swole shut, and I couldn't take a full breath without pain ripping through my ribs. My hands were sticky with blood, some his, mostly mine. Through the door, I could still hear him out there, pacing, breathing, whispering things that I couldn't quite make out. The door then jolted hard and I jumped up. Another slam. Then a pause. Then the wood cracking. I scrambled backward, trying to drag the coffee table across the entryway, but my arms wouldn't move right. I think it was dislocated. The chain lock snapped and the door buckled and groaned. Then it gave out completely. He stood there in the frame, calm now, breathing slowly. "Should have just minded your own fucking business," he said. I tried to stand and didn't make it. He crossed my room in 2 steps, grabbed me by the collar, and flung me toward the hallway. I hit the wall, shoulder first, and dropped. I tried to crawl, but he kicked the back of my head and I folded. Then came more punches, hard, deep ones to the ribs and back, like he was trying to reach through me. I think I blacked out for a second because when I opened up my eyes, I was in my bedroom. He dragged me there. I was on the mattress on my back, the bed lopsided from the force that he'd thrown me in with. My blood was already soaking into the sheets. He stood over me panting, then reached down, and this is the part that still sticks with me the most, pulled the blanket up over me, tucked it around my sides like a mother putting her kid to sleep. "Don't knock on my fucking door again," he said. "You don't call anyone, you don't even look at me or her." He turned around and started walking, then stopped in the doorway. "Oh, I'm taking this too," he added. I couldn't see it clearly, but I heard the clink, the hook near the front door, the spare key that I always left hanging there. He took it. "If I hear you say a word to anybody," he said, "I'll come in while you're sleeping and I'll slit your fucking throat." And then just like that, he was gone. The door creaked closed behind him. I heard his boots retreat across the hallway, the quiet pull of his apartment door opening and then shutting. No lock, no final word, just that silence again. I laid in bed until morning and didn't sleep at all, didn't move, just stared at the ceiling and listened to the pipes moan behind the wall. Every little creak sounded like another footstep. Every car door outside made my stomach twist. I kept thinking he was coming back, that he'd left something unfinished. I didn't go to work the next day or the next day after that. I didn't call the cops because, again, what would I say? That I got beat up for playing hero? That I poked my nose where it didn't belong? They probably wouldn't even come out again. So a week later, I started looking for new places. It took me 2 full months, but I finally got out. Didn't even break the lease, just paid through the end and walked. I left half my furniture behind. I couldn't stand to look at the bed again. The mattress was still bloody. I didn't even have it in me to throw it out. Just let the landlord deal with it. Now I triple check my locks. I keep my blinds shut. I flinch when somebody knocks on the wall, even if it's just the pipes. I still don't even sleep right to this day. I'll wake up thinking he's back, standing at the foot of my bed, holding up that key. I never saw that woman again either. Sometimes or occasionally I'll think back to her, wonder if she ever got out, or if she's still in there, taking those punches and screaming behind those old, paper-thin walls. I've lived alone for most of my adult life, not by some great design or a tragedy, just by default. No kids, no ex-wife, not even a dog. I had a job that I didn't hate, enough friends to keep me from going completely nuts, and a few hobbies that would pass the time. The rest was just filler. If something needed done, I would do it eventually. Laundry, dishes, groceries, car maintenance. All of it existed on this weird clock of motivation that rarely lined up with logic. I kept the fridge mostly empty because I hated grocery stores. I hated cooking even more. Most nights I'd realize that I was hungry, hop in the car for a drive-thru or a pickup order. I knew every greasy spoon and every takeout window within a 10-mile radius. The place that I lived in was this squat little rental, just off a frontage road behind a rundown strip mall. 1 bedroom, no yard to speak of, blinds that were always crooked. It was quiet enough, which is all I really cared about. Never had any trouble with the neighbors. Never had any real sense of community either. Most nights I'd get home late, kick off my boots, fire up Hulu or PlayStation, and ride the couch into the early hours. Sometimes I'd scroll through dating apps or online auctions just to kill some time. I didn't drink much, never saw the appeal, and I never touched drugs. I was just lazy in a way that felt like it ran in my blood. The only thing I really stayed on top of was work. I wasn't passionate about it or anything, but it kept the lights on, paid my rent. I was the kind of guy who just did it enough to keep moving forward, even if that meant barely. The house was cluttered but not filthy. The car had its issues but still ran. I didn't owe anybody anything and nobody owed me. It was a very simple, low-stakes existence, and I'd gotten real comfortable living in that way. Until one of these nights, it came off the rails because I couldn't be bothered to cook dinner. That night, I got off work around 9. I was wiped. I hadn't eaten anything since noon, and the idea of boiling water or even making a sandwich felt like a whole ordeal. So I grabbed my keys, called in an order to this hole-in-the-wall Chinese place that I like, Paco Panda, out by the gas station. I picked something to stream while I waited. Some murder show probably. I just remember my stomach twisting up at the thought of sesame chicken. It was only a short drive, maybe 10 minutes. The place was mostly empty when I walked in. I paid, grabbed my bag, and thanked the lady at the counter, and went back to my car. The food smelled amazing. I remember turning the heater on full blast even though it was early fall. My idea of a food hack. I just wanted to get home, plant my ass on the couch, and eat straight from the cartons. I hit the first light coming out of the parking lot and came to a stop. Music was playing, Let's Go to War by the Murder Dolls, and everything was normal until I noticed movement off to my left. There was this old sun-bleached sedan pulling up beside me, engine rattling, windows down. I glanced over and saw 4 guys inside, early 20s maybe. At first I thought they were trying to get my attention about something, maybe my lights were off or I dropped my wallet or something. I turned my music down and rolled my window halfway. "What?" I called out to them. The guy in the passenger seat leaned out and yelled at me. "You look like you beat off to cartoons, bro." There was this beat where I really didn't react, and then it kind of clicked. They were just being dickheads. I don't know why, but I fired back something without thinking. "Is that something you know a lot about? You like cartoon cum time?" His face dropped, just for a second, but it was enough. Then the light turned green and I gunned it. I didn't expect them to follow me, but they did. They didn't tailgate me or try to run me off the road or anything crazy at first. They just stayed behind me, nice and steady. I took a few more turns trying to be sure they were. They matched every move. I pulled into this random grocery store lot and looped around to see if they'd break off, but they didn't. By the time I made it back to my neighborhood, my hands were sweating on the wheel. I considered circling the block maybe, trying to lose them, but I figured screw it. They'll get bored eventually, right? I pulled into my driveway and left the engine running. Their car rolled up right behind me and stopped in the street. 3 of them got out. The driver stayed put. I didn't recognize any of them. One was tall and wiry, wearing this ski cap even though it wasn't cold out. Another had a hoodie with the strings tied around his face now. The third looked like he had prison muscle, just thick and mean. They didn't charge at my car or anything, they just spread out, slowly walking around me, looking in the windows and muttering something to each other. I stayed in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel like a lifeline. My phone was in my pocket, but I hadn't reached for it. I didn't want to draw any attention. "All right, come on out, tough guy," one of them said. "Yeah, keep talking that shit," said another, tapping on the glass with his knuckle. I still didn't move. One of them kicked the driver's side door, hard enough to rattle me, and dented it, of course. Then they all laughed. They stood in my yard for maybe 5 more minutes, pointing at stuff, my trash cans, the porch light, my car, just taking stock of what they could fuck with. I expected them to key my doors, to slash a tire, or maybe worse, but eventually they got back in their car and took off without another word. I sat there for another 5 minutes before moving, just breathing, trying to calm down. Then I grabbed my food, went inside, and double-locked the door. It took me a while to eat. My hands were still shaking, but after a few bites and a few episodes of whatever was on Hulu, things started to settle. I actually started to feel a little stupid about it. Probably just bored kids looking for a thrill. Nothing too serious. By 10, I'd moved on to playing some kind of shooter online. The tension was gone, I was in my boxers, half a beer left on the coffee table, game controller in my hand, completely relaxed. That was at least until past midnight, and that's when I heard footsteps outside my house. Not distant ones, not from the sidewalk or the road. These were closer, on my driveway, slow, heavy crunches. I muted the TV and went to the front window, moving the curtain just enough to peek through. There it was, same shitty sedan, parked in the same exact spot, 3 figures moving up the path to my front door. And this time, they weren't joking around. Same guys, same car, same dead-eyed swagger like they owned the night itself. One of them had something in his hand, I couldn't really tell what. Maybe a tire iron or a flashlight, but it caught the porch light weird and had this glint and shadow to it. I backed away from the window and locked the deadbolt, then the knob, then slid on the security chain across. My heart was thudding so loud it sounded like footsteps in my ears too. I didn't have a gun, never thought I needed one. I didn't even have mace. There's the kitchen full of dull knives and a vague sense of regret. One of the guys banged on the door, flat palm first and then with his fist. He barked at me to open up. "Come on, you tough shit. Come say what you said earlier." They pounded harder. The door was old, hollow core, rental grade garbage. It wouldn't last too long if they really wanted in. For a second I couldn't move. I just stood there in the living room in my socks, lights still on, beer going warm. My mouth was dry as chalk. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? 3 guys are outside being scary? I hung out with these rough kids growing up and I knew how that would go. They'd be gone before a cruiser even showed up, if one even showed up. I turned off the lights. In the dark, the panic sharpened. It made everything feel thinner and more fragile. I could hear them talking out there, louder now. One of them was trying the doorknob. Another stomped on the steps like a child throwing a fit. Then it went quiet. I crept inside the back bedroom. My closet door was open, and inside was something I haven't touched in years, this cheap-ass katana that I bought at the state fair back in high school. It wasn't sharpened, just some steel replica meant to sit on a stand. But it was heavy, long, and intimidating enough in the right lighting. I grabbed it, then opened up a plastic bin where I kept this old Halloween junk, pulled out the mask that I wore a few years ago, this rubber demon face with warped horns and sharp teeth. It stank of dust and plastic, but I shoved it on and made for the back door. I slipped outside, moving along the side of the house, keeping low. The grass under my feet was wet. My heart was still slamming in my chest. I inched forward until I could see the 3 of them again, still near the porch, looking pissed and confused. 30 more seconds, dumbass, one of them called out. Then we break your fucking windows. I didn't give myself any time to think or think twice. I charged. I came around the side of the house full speed, barefoot and wild, swinging the katana over my head like a lunatic. I didn't yell anything coherent, just a howl and this high and raw that ripped out of my chest. They all turned at once. I don't know what they thought they saw, a masked freak with a sword, barefoot and snarling, but it was enough. One of them screamed. The big one tripped over his own feet trying to run backwards, and they all scrambled back to their car, door slamming, tires screeching as they peeled off into the dark. I stood there in the yard until the engine noise faded, and that was the last time I ever saw them. After that, I started locking the doors earlier, got a motion light installed, even went and bought a real baseball bat, not for show. I still eat that Chinese takeout, I still live alone, still waste far too much time on the couch, but I don't really mouth off to strangers anymore. It was the spring of 1996. I was a 15-year-old American girl living in Pakistan with my grandparents. My family had been going through some difficult times back home in the US, and my mother, wanting to shield me from the turmoil, decided it would be best for me to live abroad for a while. What started as this temporary arrangement turned into something a lot more permanent by choice. I'd been in Pakistan since the age of 11, and over time, it truly began to feel like home. I embraced the culture, learned the language, and built strong relationships with my family and friends. Despite having the option to return to the US after every visit, I always chose to stay. Pakistan just became my second home. Our household was always full. My grandparents, my aunt and uncle, their 3 children, the neighbors, and of course, frequent visitors. We had this open door policy, both literally and figuratively. It was the kind of neighborhood where people rarely locked their doors during the day. It felt safe, secure, or at least so we thought. Inside households like ours, it's common to hire domestic help, cooks, cleaners, and general helpers. While my family opted for female help, especially when daughters were in the house, some would prefer young male workers who were seen as stronger and more agile. My grandparents hired this male helper, Bashir, who had his own quarters outside the house. Despite his presence being normalized in our culture, I always felt this deep unease around him. Maybe it was instinctual or maybe just caution, but I got into this habit of locking any room that I was in when I was home, alone or not, just in case. Being in Pakistan is different. My grandparents were wealthy, but knew danger could lie around any corner, especially for a young girl like myself. And on one particular day in spring, everything changed. That afternoon, I was relaxing in my aunt and uncle's bedroom watching TV. It was my favorite spot when they weren't home because they had this private television, unlike the shared one inside the family lounge downstairs. Now, I had no idea at the time, but I was alone in the house for the first time since moving to Pakistan. My grandfather was at work, my aunt and uncle had taken the kids to another town, and my grandmother had just left for an errand with our driver. Then came a knock, loud, repetitive, and urgent. I paused the TV and placed my ear against the door. It was Bashir. He was calling my name in a hurried, anxious tone, asking me to open up. When I asked what he needed, he claimed he had something to give to me. I refused, and he quickly shifted, saying he needed to ask me something. So I told him to ask me through the door. But he didn't respond with words. Instead, he began turning the knob and pushing it against the door frame a lot more forcefully. My heart started pounding and reality sank in. I was alone with him. Panic set in, but so did instinct. I looked around for options. The phone in the bedroom was useless without the phone directory, which was downstairs near my grandparents' room. I didn't have any phone numbers memorized. I looked out the front window, hoping to spot somebody nearby, maybe the neighbor or the friend who lived across the street, but no such luck. Meanwhile, Bashir was still trying to get in. I thought about hiding in the closet, but it had no lock. I made a quick decision and ran to the attached bathroom. It had 2 locks. I secured both and climbed up to the small window high up on the wall, hoping to get somebody's attention. Once up there, I could see the neighboring house very clearly and tried yelling to get the helpers outside, but just as I was about to scream louder, I heard a familiar voice. It was my grandmother. She was calling my name from the hallway. I waited for confirmation though, and when I finally heard her voice again, I carefully opened up the bathroom door and then the bedroom door to find my grandmother standing alone and breathless. She immediately apologized, saying she just realized that I was home alone by myself and had now rushed back. She and I both knew what a dangerous mistake it had been to leave me alone that day. I never ended up telling her what Bashir had done. I don't know if she saw him retreat from the door or noticed something was off, but I kept it to myself. The whole ordeal lasted no more than 20 minutes, but it was the most terrifying 20 minutes of my life. Feeling trapped, helpless, and vulnerable inside your own home was this brutal awakening. Years later in the mid-2000s, I returned to Pakistan for a visit with my mom. By then, I was back in the US full-time. One afternoon while visiting my grandparents, my mom and aunts started to tease me about this quote-unquote surprise visitor who had come all the way from another village just to see me. They were laughing and nudging each other as they told me to come into the living room. I walked in and there he was, Bashir. My heart sank. He looked unwell. His eyes were bloodshot and he had that dazed look of somebody who hadn't slept in days. He stared at me with this strange intensity. I kept my face calm and greeted him politely and said I'd heard he got married. Congratulations. He nodded silently. I quickly excused myself and went to my room. That was the last time I saw him. Even after all those years, seeing him brought everything flooding back to me. The fear, the panic, the knowledge that something horrible could indeed have happened that day. Now, I'll never know what his true intentions were, but my gut tells me that I narrowly escaped something awful. What he didn't know was that I wasn't some naive, easily fooled girl. I was a fighter. I'd grown up with 2 older brothers and had been learning karate since I was 6. My instructor actually used to call me Little Tiger. And if he would have managed to break through those doors, he would have met the tiger inside me. That day shaped me. It taught me about instincts, strength, and survival. And I've carried all that silently with me for years, but today, I finally speak it out loud. Thanks for listening. In 1995, I was 11 years old and living in a small town in the Southwest. One of those places that still really felt untouched by the worst part of the world. Both my parents worked full-time, so I was what you'd call that latchkey kid. I didn't mind. We weren't rich, but we had a decent little house with a garage, a backyard, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. My parents trusted me to stay out of trouble, and for the most part, I usually did. I was actually pretty good at being alone. Most days after school, I'd ride my bike around until I was tired. We didn't have cell phones or constant surveillance back then, just street lights and instinct. I had good instinct too, even as a kid. I knew which dogs barked, which fences to avoid, which roads had the rough pavement that could throw you off if you hit it too fast. I knew where those weirdos would live. I knew how to disappear if something didn't feel right either. Back then, that town really didn't feel dangerous. Not really. It was that stereotypical place where people left their front door unlocked, waved to each other from the driveway. We had block parties, fireworks shows, and old men who mowed each other's lawns just to be helpful. My parents weren't careless, they were just busy. They worked super long hours and came home tired. And I understood that, and I never held it against them. I knew how to make my own snacks and lock the door when it got dark. I stayed inside when I was supposed to. I answered the phone when it rang. Nothing had ever gone wrong until that one night. Now, I'd seen Freddie around plenty of times before. He lived 4 houses down, worked as some kind of mechanic, had a carport full of broken down junkers and greasy tools. He was quiet but friendly. Hey there kiddo kind of guy. Sometimes he brought over bags of oranges or helped my dad fix the mower. His kid lived with their mom in another town, and when they visited, I heard them laughing in his yard. He never gave me any kind of reason to be afraid of him. That day was long and hot, one of those dry, stretching Saturdays that seemed to go on and on. Both my parents had picked up shifts, my mom at the hospital, my dad at the garage. I had that whole day to myself with no homework to worry about, so I did what I always did. I grabbed my bike, filled up my water bottle, and rode on. I circled the neighborhood over and over, past those same hedges and driveways and cul-de-sacs, letting my legs go on this autopilot mode, where I made up stories in my head. I pretend I was a detective tailing some kind of fugitive, a courier with a secret message. I stopped once for soda at the gas station and once more to sit on the curb outside the park and just eat this melted granola bar. Around 6, the sun was dipping lower. The shadows started to stretch across the sidewalks. Time to head home. I coasted back toward our house, turning onto our street just as Freddie was pulling into his driveway. I waved and he waved back. I could see a beer in his hand already, and his truck sounded like it was on its last leg. I didn't think much of it in the moment. I was already picturing microwave popcorn and good reruns of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Hey there, kiddo, he called out, leaning against the hood of his truck as I pedaled past. Been out all day, huh? Yeah, I said, hopping off and walking my bike up the driveway. Getting tall too, he added. Almost didn't even recognize you from behind. Now that stopped me. I turned, polite but cautious. He was still smiling, but his eyes looked glassy. You're filling out those jeans real nice, he said. And that is when my stomach twisted. I didn't know what to say or how to respond to that. I'm not used to adults talking like that. Not to me or not around me. I muttered something like, I should go, then started wheeling my bike toward the garage. Come on, don't be like that, he said, stepping off the curb and wandering closer. I was just saying, you're real pretty now. You ever need anything, just come by. I mean it. I kept walking. You know, my kids don't visit me too much, he went on. Maybe you and me could hang out sometime, talk, watch movies or something. I got cable, a lot of good stuff on. I tried not to cry, but my hands were shaking on the handlebars. I turned back towards the garage and hit the button on the wall. The motor groaned and the door started to lower. Behind me, I heard fast footsteps, then metal scraping, then the slam of the garage door reversing and shooting back up on its track. Hey, don't be rude now, Freddie barked at me. He had stormed inside the garage. I dropped my bike and ran. The side door to the house was cracked. I shoved through and nearly fell onto the tile. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close he was. I just knew he was behind me. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping somebody, anybody, might hear me. I made it down the hall past the kitchen and past the living room, turned left into the hallway that led into the bedrooms. All the lights were off. The whole house was dim and shadowed. I didn't stop for a weapon, not even really to think. I yanked open the closet near the hallway bathroom and crawled inside, slamming the door behind me, pressing my back up against the shelves of towels. I sat there in the dark holding my breath, clenching my fists so tightly that my nails were now biting into my palms. I heard the front door creak open. Heavy, slow footsteps followed, breathing and low, angry muttering. "Where'd you go?" he said, his voice sing-song and cheerful. "You in here, sweetheart? Come on now, don't be a brat." The footsteps then circled the living room, then moved to the kitchen. Cabinet doors opened and something crashed. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from sobbing. He moved toward the hallway. The floor creaked just outside the closet door. He passed it. I heard him enter my parents' bedroom, drawers opening, the bed shifting under his weight. He was still mumbling to himself, something about girls always teasing and always running. I stayed frozen, heart hammering, ears straining. When I finally heard the door to the room close again, I waited, counted to 60, then another 60. I slowly eased the closet door open. The hallway was empty. I didn't walk, I ran. Up the stairs, skipping steps and nearly tripping in the dark. The old wood creaked under my weight, and every sound that I made felt like a flare going up, loud, obvious, and begging him to find me. At the top, I ducked into the bathroom, slammed the door, and twisted that tiny lock until it clicked. I backed away, holding my breath. Below me, I could still hear him, his voice echoing faintly through the vents, still in my parents' room talking to himself. I knew I couldn't stay here. The door was flimsy. The lock was not meant for anything worse than a sibling trying to get in during an emergency. My only chance was the window. I climbed onto the toilet, nudged the screen out with my elbow, and eased the window up inch by inch. The cool night air hit my face. I could see the roof of the garage, flat, with this big silver AC unit near the center, just a few feet out. I didn't think, I just climbed. My bare knees scraped the shingles. I crawled low and fast, ducking behind the AC unit. My back pressed up against the metal casing, still warm from the prior sun. My breath was coming in quick, and I couldn't really control it. Inside the house, I heard something else slam. He was still in there, still looking. So I stayed right there, curled up behind the unit, not even peeking. The garage roof felt like this tiny island. I had no way down, no way to get help. Just a small pocket of safety where I could wait and pray that he wouldn't think to check above. The stars slowly came out, one by one. I saw the neighbor's porch light flicker on. Somewhere off down the street, a car pulled into its driveway and a door slammed shut. All the normal sounds of my neighborhood. So familiar, so harmless. But I stayed there, and at some point I think I fell asleep, maybe even for a minute, but it was long enough. I woke up to the sound of my name. My mom's voice, my dad's too, calling out from the front yard. I sat up fast and scraped my palms on the shingles, but I didn't care. I peeked over the edge and saw their car in the driveway. The headlights was off, but the interior light was glowing as the doors hung open. I shouted for my mom. They ran toward me, panic on their faces. I pointed to the window and waved both arms. They told me to stay put, then disappeared off into the house. I waited there again, frozen behind the AC unit, until I heard them calling me from inside. My mom appeared at the window. Her face was pale, voice was shaking. "It's okay," she said. "What happened?" I crawled in through the window and collapsed into her arms, and I cried. I told them everything, all of it, in fits and sobs. My dad listened without saying a word. My mom held my face and told me that it was okay, that I was safe, that I was brave, and that I did the right thing. I never saw Freddie again. He didn't come by the house, didn't lean on the fence, didn't wave from his driveway. He was just gone, like he never even existed. I asked my parents once, months later, what happened, and my mom just told me that we handled it. That's all I got, and honestly, I think it's all I needed.
I had just finished moving into my new house, an old tiny 2-bedroom, 1 bath. Aside from having a friend helping with furniture, I spent the entire day moving boxes by myself. Naturally, I was exhausted, way too tired to bother making my bed, so I plopped down onto the couch and quickly began fading off to sleep. However, I was disturbed by the doorbell. It was nighttime, but not that late, so I didn't want to be rude and ignore my new neighbors. When I opened the door, I was met with a woman. She could have been in her 30s or 50s, as she was sagging skin and frail bones, like she hadn't had a bite of food in months. Her hair, while messy, was a strikingly bright blonde, and her eyes were an equally piercing blue. Beyond her physical appearance, she had this unnerving aura. The second I saw her, my heart skipped a beat. Perhaps if she'd been healthier and cleaner, I would have been instantly attracted to her. But instead, her presence set alarms off in my brain. Maybe I knew subconsciously that her toothy smile was a blatant lie, or that her eyes were devoid of any warmth that should have been there. As she opened her mouth to speak, I couldn't understand what she was saying at first. My mind was focused elsewhere, on the pungent smell of dry hunger on her breath. Her eyes had dipped down as she spoke, and for some reason, it made me think she was sizing me up for her next meal. Once I finally registered her words, I realized she said, "You must be the new neighbor," in a crackling yet alluring voice. I stuttered as I replied that I was. Then she said that she noticed I had moved in alone. I tried to think back if I had seen her among the people in the neighborhood earlier, but I couldn't remember anyone who looked remotely like her. Despite the creeps I was getting, I didn't think she posed a threat, given that I was a foot taller and probably had 100 pounds on her, so I kept the door open for a short conversation. She asked if I had plans to get a roommate for my second bedroom, but I explained I was going to use it more like an office. This made her frown. Then she said, "Well, isn't that lonely?" I answered no because I like to live alone. That's when the woman stepped through the doorway uninvited, placed one hand on my chest, and wrapped another around my waist. Then she whispered, "If you'd like to change your mind, I can keep you company tonight." Her words sent a chill down the length of my spine and split my brain in two. Thankfully, I chose reason. Without saying a word, I took her hands off me and pushed her out the door, slamming it in her face. I waited for her to ring the bell again, to start banging on the door and scream that I was a pig. But there was nothing from the other side of the threshold but deafening silence. Maybe 10 seconds later, I looked through the peephole. She was gone, but I hadn't seen her leave. It was like she vanished. I was freaked the hell out. Was this going to be a recurring thing? What kind of sicko swinger neighborhood had I just moved into? Maybe she was homeless and desperate. I didn't know, but it was one of those encounters that made me wish I had a cabinet full of liquor and a fridge full of beer. With nothing in the house to calm me down, I just had to hope that I was exhausted enough to pass out on my own. I laid on the couch again, and after a little while of tossing and turning, I did manage to fall asleep. There, I fell into a strange and vivid dream. Without covers, wearing only the clothes I had moved in, I felt cold. This coldness was alleviated by a warm, comforting entity crawling up into my arms and settling into my grasp. It was like a loyal dog or loving companion came to bed. At first, I welcomed this dream, but then it soured. The entity would not lie still. It squirmed and writhed, scratching at my stomach, like it was trying to dig ever deeper for more comfort. I wanted out. I opened my eyes and saw the most horrifying sight of my life. The woman from the door was lying with me. I wanted to scream and shove her across the room, but I couldn't move. It was like sleep paralysis, and she was my demon. She was clawing at my stomach, tearing through my skin. I thought she would rip me open at any moment. Finally, I shot awake, but then I realized it had never been a dream. She was really there. I broke free and jumped off the couch. She fell when I went out from under her, hitting the floor hard. Then she looked up at me and let out an ear-piercing scream. I could only scream back like a panicking wild animal. I was ready to fight her, to break every brittle bone in her body. She'd shot me full of adrenaline, and I think even in her crazed state, she knew this. After looking at me for a second, she bolted. I went after her, watching as she climbed out an open window. I hadn't even checked if everything was locked yet because I had just moved in, and that had given her the entry she needed. I slammed the window shut, then checked the locks and everything in the house. Gradually, the adrenaline wore off and I began to feel the pain in my abdomen. I looked down to see dozens of deep, jagged cuts from her fingernails. I called 911 to report the incident to the police and have my wounds treated. The police said the description I gave matched that of a criminally insane woman who had recently escaped from a nearby mental hospital. I had no idea there was such a facility in the area. I never heard anything about her after that, whether she was caught or still roams the streets. I think about her almost every night. Sometimes, it makes me want to sell the house and move as far away as possible. A long time ago, I worked at Chuck E. Cheese. Yes, I was the rat, the complete stranger in the suit that parents let roam around and interact with their kids. However, this isn't a confession of some creepy shit I did decades ago, but something that happened to me. To be honest, I can't say there was ever a pleasant moment wearing that suit. The other 40 minutes out of the hour were usually spent washing dishes, taking out the trash, or doing some other menial task. Beyond that, the horde of kids was an absolute nightmare to deal with. Anyway, I have something much more specific to talk about. I was in the suit one day going through the arcade when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I didn't have good peripheral vision in the mask, but I could see that there were two people staring at me. At that time, I couldn't even tell who they were to each other, but they seemed anxious about something as they were fidgeting and shifting around. I soon moved on from that area, but I couldn't get away from them. Every time I stopped in a new spot and looked around, I'd catch a glimpse of those two weirdos staring at me while picking at themselves. They were obviously following me, but I couldn't recognize a single kid that was with me the entire time that they might be watching. Admittedly, a little freaked out, I tried to ignore them. I was walking toward the entrance to the changing room, but then they got in my way. They literally blocked the entryway, and now, since they were front and center, I finally got a good look at them, a sight that made me wish I didn't have eyes. The man towered over me, standing at least 6'2", with roided out muscles bulging through his skin. The woman was barely over 4 feet tall, skinny as hell, with sunken eyes and sagging skin. Despite the fact she was obviously much older, she was dressed in frilly pink girls' clothes, which looked like they'd been fished out of a dumpster. There was a rule that no adults could enter the play area without being accompanied by a child, so I had no idea which one of my lazy-ass coworkers let this 40-year-old drug addict pass for a kid, but I was sure about to tear them a new one. The first thing the guy said was, "Hey man, how much for the suit?" I told him it wasn't for sale, but then he just flat out asked me to let him put it on. I declined once more, only for his face to instantly swell up and turn beet red. I thought he was about to knock me out, but then the woman grabbed his arm, looked at me with the most horrendous attempt at puppy dog eyes, and begged me to let her daddy wear the suit. Now, I knew exactly what kind of effed up shit these people wanted the suit for, and it made me want to throw up in it. Just then, a manager came up and asked what was going on. I simply pointed to the woman, and the manager knew instantly they had snuck in without a kid, so he escorted them out. Thinking the interaction was over, I went into the changing room and got out of the suit. After dabbing the sweat off my body and chugging some ice water, I rushed out the back door for a smoke break before anyone could tell me to do something. I was standing out there by myself, leaning back against the wall, when I see two people round the corner. I instantly knew it was those two crackheads trying to find me, so I flicked my cigarette and turned back to go inside. But then I realized I had locked myself out. The door was always set to lock itself from the inside, and I'd forgotten to prop it open because I was so exhausted. Panicking, I started pounding on the door, hoping someone would hear me and open the door in time. A few seconds later, I saw that the freaks were running toward me. I turned to haul ass, but then the second guy screamed, "You should have given me the suit." The next thing I knew, he plowed into me and put me in a chokehold. I was totally powerless, only able to watch as that demonic little woman pulled out a switchblade and pressed it against my stomach. They kept asking me to take them to the suit, but I told them I couldn't because the door was locked. Just as I said that, the door opened, and one of my coworkers came out to see what was happening. The look on their face was pure shock as they froze solid. The psycho bitch screamed at them to get the Chucky suit and give it to them. The poor idiot stammered and stalled, causing the woman to start pushing the knife into my stomach. As soon as I felt it pierce the skin, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Just go get it, goddammit. A minute later, 3 or 4 of my coworkers came out with different pieces of the suit, all of them looking like deer in headlights. The pieces were all dropped on the ground. Then I was thrown back. When I caught my breath and looked up, the psychos were running off with the suit. They got what they wanted, but at least it was over. I only had a shallow wound from the knife, but I did lose my job. Apparently, that stupid suit cost thousands of dollars, and the managers held me responsible for getting it stolen. Good riddance to it anyway. It always smelled like ass. Unfortunately, that has left me with the unwanted thought of, what did those two do with the suit? I've given it far too much thought over the years. At best, they kept it for some sickening sexual fantasy. But at worst, they might have used it to try and lure the vulnerable and innocent into a trap. This is a true story from when I was 11 years old. I was hanging out with my friend at a huge park complex that had playgrounds, stores, restaurants, and even places that taught classes on different activities and martial arts. Our parents had dropped us off there, planning to pick us up at 9 p.m. At 8, my friend had a dance class, so I decided to go to my twin brother, who was elsewhere in the park with one of his friends. As I was running over to him, I lost my breath and decided to duck into a shop that had AC, which turned out to be a place that taught painting lessons. The moment I entered, an old man walked up to me. He was wearing a white shirt with marker stains on it, so I figured he was the owner. With a crooked, forced smile, he said to me, "Want to watch me paint?" As a kid, I didn't know how to say no, so I said sure. We sat at a table where he had a canvas set up with a creepy drawing of what looked like a baby. Then he gave me his phone and told me to record him. So I did. For 20 eternal, awkward minutes, I sat quietly and watched him paint. There wasn't a single other person in the shop. It was just me and him. And I kept wondering why nobody was coming in. Over time, I got thirsty, so I timidly asked him for water. That was the first thing I'd said since we sat down. And as soon as I said it, his mood shifted. He gave me that same crooked smile, only more exaggerated. Then he got up and brought water for both of us. When he sat back down, he took his phone back and started asking me questions, now ignoring the painting, just entirely focused on me. He asked what school I went to, but I gave him the name of my old school since I had just switched. Next, he asked if I lived in the area. I lied and said that I didn't, but I had no clue if I was convincing. Then, he asked me if I had an Instagram, and if he could follow it. I knew something was wrong with the conversation, but I was too young and shy to know how to get out of it. Luckily, I gave him my fake account that didn't have any posts on it. I had become extremely uncomfortable, so I decided to call my mom. The trouble was, my phone died on the way to the mall, so I left it in the car. I did have my mom's number memorized, but I was still forced to ask the old man if I could use his phone to call her. In a mere second, the man's face changed. The fake smile was gone, replaced by a very real frown. He barked at me to go outside, saying he would call her out there. Scared by him raising his voice, but thinking I would finally get out of the situation, I did what he said. By then it was almost 9 p.m., and the park was emptying out. I got outside, waiting for the old man to follow me and pull out his phone. But the moment the door closed, he grabbed me by my wrist and pulled me into the alley right by the shop. I tried to scream, but he had his hand over my mouth, pushing my head back against the concrete wall. I cried silently, wondering if I was about to die. The man bent down and told me face to face that if I wanted to live, I had to do as he said. I nodded frantically. Then he told me to stay quiet and follow him deeper into the alley, rounding a corner where we weren't visible from the park. Behind the shop, he grabbed a rope that was tied around a dead tree, first tying it around my mouth, then my arms and legs. Then, he left me there and entered the shop through the back door. I didn't know what he could possibly be getting, but I knew it wouldn't be long until he would be back. The second I was alone, my mind entered overdrive. Like the fact he was no longer in my sight finally allowed me to think clearly. I remembered how I used to play kidnapper with my cousin and brother. Since I was the girl, I was usually the one that got captured. Because my cousin was freakishly good at tying knots, I had learned how to get out of even the toughest ones. It took a terrifyingly long time, but I managed to free my hands and legs, then barely freed my mouth as the man came out the back door. He dropped all his stuff and sprinted towards me as he saw me out of the road. I ran for my life, weaving through the remaining crowds of the park until I found my brother. The man was long gone, and my mind was already trying to convince itself the whole thing was just a dream, something I made up. When my brother asked me why I was freaking out, I just kept saying it was nothing. My friend met up with us soon after. Then my mom arrived and took us all home. I wanted to, but I was too scared. It's just one of those irrational things a kid does sometimes, I guess. I tried forgetting about it. I almost did. About a month later, I went to the mall again. This time, I saw something that completely broke me. We passed by the same shop, and when I glanced inside, I saw the old man sitting with another girl my age who was clearly uncomfortable. I looked away immediately and put that image in the vault before I could even process it. I know it's terrible, but I repressed the memory entirely until very recently. I feel very guilty that I got out of that situation, only to leave the trap there for someone else. When I went back to that park years after it happened, the shop and the man were gone, replaced. I have no idea if he ever succeeded in doing whatever he planned with me, but I hope to God he didn't. I had just turned 25 when I finally took the trip to California that I'd been planning for months. I was traveling from the Dominican Republic, so I had 2 layovers and was primarily traveling overnight. The short flight into Miami was fine, but it was during my 2-hour layover there that I first encountered problems. While I was waiting for my plane to Colorado to arrive, I noticed a suspicious man sitting in the row of seats across from me. He was dressed in dark clothes that covered most of his skin. His hat was tilted down, covering his eyes, and he was holding his phone outward as if he was filming. I couldn't think of any other reason why he would be holding his phone like that, but it was extremely crowded, so I figured it was unlikely that I was the focus. I just hoped we didn't get seated near each other. Unfortunately, luck was not on my side. I was seated next to the aisle in the very last row, and he was sitting by the window on the other side of the aisle. That meant only 2 chairs separated us, but when the plane finished boarding, the middle seat remained unoccupied, so there was only one person between us. Shortly after, the plane took off. Then about an hour into the flight, I noticed that the man had pulled out his phone and was turned to the side, facing me. Realizing at this point he had to be filming me, I shot him a nasty look, but it didn't seem to do anything. He just kept on pointing his phone at me, and the person sitting between us was completely unaware. I wasn't sure what else to do but call for a flight attendant. When one of the women came over, I explained that the man by the window was recording me. She turned to look at the man, who was still blatantly recording, and asked him to stop. She managed to get him to put his phone away, but literally as soon as she walked away, he took it back out. I was finally angry enough to ask him point blank why he was filming me. He simply said in a thick Russian accent, "Because you're beautiful." I told him to stop as he had no right to film me without my consent, but he just shook his head and said, No, it's okay." I couldn't believe him. Who did he think he was? Who did he think I was? Clearly there was no stopping him as long as he had a clear view. So I asked the person by the window seat on my side if we could switch. He'd been listening to the entire interaction, so he agreed. He was heavier set, so his gut blocked the creep from being able to get a good shot of me. A little later, the cabin lights were turned down, so people could get some sleep since it was almost midnight. With the help of darkness, I felt like it was finally over with. So I also settled in for a nap, but I soon realized I was not going to get comfortable unless I got up to use the bathroom. Since we were at the back of the plane, the bathrooms were literally right there. Both were unoccupied, so I took the closest one. I'm not kidding when I say the second my ass touched the toilet seat, someone tried to open the door. They kept shaking it like they were trying to break the lock. I hurried to cover myself up. But then I heard a flight attendant tell the person that the lavatory was occupied. Then they responded by playing dumb in that same Russian accent, confirming what I already thought, that the creep from before was trying to film me in the bathroom. I was in disbelief. What a sicko. I couldn't relax for a moment the rest of the flight. When the plane landed, I rushed to get away from it. My next flight was scheduled 3 hours later, but on the opposite side of the terminal, so I hurried over there anyway. I put my bags down next to someone and asked them to watch my stuff for a moment while I went to the bathroom, as I was never able to actually go on the plane. They agreed. Then I basically ran into the bathroom. Surprisingly, there was nobody in there except for a few occupied stalls, only because it was the middle of the night. I sat down in a stall and finally relieved myself, but it only lasted about 10 seconds before I heard a woman's voice loudly yell out, "Hey, stop that." I looked up and saw a phone peeking over the stall door. It was the same one from the plane. That pervert had followed me across the airport and into the bathroom. I screamed in shock, trying to cover myself up. The phone quickly disappeared behind the door. Then I got up and put my pants back on as quickly as possible, ready to kill that piece of shit. But when I got out, he was gone. The woman who walked in on him apologized, saying he ran past her. I felt so violated. I was completely exposed and vulnerable for a significant moment there, and he captured all of it. I wanted to rip my skin off. Tracking down security, I told them the whole story. They said they would look for him, but since he seemed to be already long gone, there was little they could do. It took everything in me not to cry the entire time I was waiting for my next flight. I felt trapped in that airport. All I wanted to do was go home, but I refused to let my trip get ruined before it even started. When I made it to LA, I was almost able to forget about what happened. But every time I had a second of quiet, I remembered. Even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about it. It makes me sick to my stomach to think that creep is still out there, exposing other women. I'm a 21-year-old girl who loves to watch horror stories on YouTube. I'm not gonna lie though, 9 times out of 10, when I watch these stories, I assume they're fake. I've never heard of a single person I know go through anything like what I've heard about on here. I see things on the news, sure, but nothing's ever hit close to home. However, that was only the case until something truly shocking happened to me last week. It happened in a completely safe neighborhood too, forcing me to realize this stuff actually does happen in real life, no matter who or where you are. When this happened, only my dad and I were home, as my mom had gone overseas for a couple of weeks. He had gone to bed around 10 p.m., but I'm a college student who's off school for the summer, so I was taking the opportunity to stay up as late as I wanted. I had the living room to myself, with access to all the streaming services my parents were signed up to. I was so sucked into it all that I didn't even think to close the curtains. The whole neighborhood had gone to bed except for me, and aside from the streetlights, it felt like the TV was the only light shining on the whole block. It was just about the only thing making any noise, too. The silence around me lasted for hours, until around 1 a.m., when I heard a sound as if the garage door was opening. However, this happened a lot where I'd hear a noise late at night that sounded like the garage, when it was really just the AC unit kicking on. So for a second I thought nothing of it. I just waited to feel a current of fresh air. Though, as I listened more closely to the noise, and noticed how soon it had stopped, I realized it sounded exactly like the garage door did when it opened. I still believed I was being paranoid, but I decided to get up and check anyway. I walked up to the door that led out to the garage, and opened it to double check that the garage door was still closed. I experienced the worst fear, shock, and horror of my life when I saw a man standing inside my garage. We made the most terrifying, gut-wrenching eye contact before I freaked out and slammed the door back into the house. I locked it a split second before I heard the man on the other side run into it. At this point, I froze for a second involuntarily. It was like my brain knew I should run to my dad for help. But my heart was beating so fast, and my legs were so shaky I could barely move. I snapped out of the state when the doorknob in front of me started to shake. The guy was trying to get in. I ran as fast as I could upstairs to my dad's room and told him someone was breaking in. He shot up out of bed and ran in front of me to where I was already headed, the closet where we kept our revolver. He grabbed the gun and rushed downstairs to the garage door, where someone was still trying to get through. I stupidly did not think to call the police until that moment, so I whipped out my phone to call 911 as my dad ordered me to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. I did so, crying as I went because I was so scared something would happen to my dad. It felt like forever. I kept expecting to hear screaming, gunshots, then the sound of someone creeping up the stairs to get me. I can't even remember how long I waited for. It could have been minutes or hours, but the police finally showed up. I heard the sirens come down the road and saw the red and blue lights flashing outside. But even then, I still had to wait for them to catch him and hope that nobody got hurt. Thankfully, the police were able to catch the man in our garage without any major disaster. He was never able to get inside the house, but continued to bang on the door and mess with the knob until the last second. I came downstairs upon hearing my dad give me the all clear. I got to see the man being walked away in handcuffs. He tried to hide his face, but my dad was still able to identify him. Apparently, the guy trying to break in was one of our neighbors. He knew my mom would be out of town, and he knew her garage code, because my parents gave it to some of our neighbors in case we needed anything in the event of some emergency while we were away. With all the chaos that night, I didn't immediately recognize him myself. I just took my dad's word that he lived nearby, but then a few hours later, it clicked. I did know that guy, but we had never actually spoken. I only recognized him because for years, I've walked past his house and seen him staring at me out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes from his front yard, sometimes through his windows. I always assumed he was just a starey divorced dad. Never expected he was ever thinking about something as crazy as breaking into our house. Now, I have to wonder how long he could have been watching me without me knowing. The craziest thing is, I couldn't even put a name to his face for the longest time, even when he was standing in the garage right in front of my eyes. Letting him have the garage code is my parents' biggest regret to this day. They've just never had a reason not to trust anyone in their lives and didn't see it as a big deal. The police haven't yet updated us on my neighbor's motive, though I guess it's not really a mystery. After this happened, because I keep picturing this guy's sick, deranged face every time I close my eyes. It was a hot summer night. I knew I wasn't going to get any sleep due to the heat, so I asked a close friend at the time if she wanted to meet up at the beach in the evening. She said yes, and told me she would bring her camera to take photos for her Instagram. I arrived at the meetup point before her, so I looked around and observed the area. Not much stood out, except I noticed two older guys glancing at me every now and then from across the street. I looked back at them a few times to make sure they were aware of them, but in the time I was waiting there, nothing else happened. Soon my friend arrived and I forgot about them. We were about a 30-minute walk from the beach, as we had planned to stop at some of the shops in the artsy little beach town. When we eventually got to the beach, we got some great shots of the sea and each other before the sun started to set, and we got some stellar shots of that too. Then we started asking people if we could take photos of them, and plenty of amazing people agreed. University students doing group yoga on the beach, an elderly couple dancing to music, a mother playing with her baby. It was going perfectly, and the lighting was incredible. After a while, the sun had gone away, and we had taken plenty of pictures for my friend's Instagram. We took an empty back street, as it was the fastest route to get to a cafe I wanted to show her. The back streets were usually safe, but I guess I wasn't used to walking around there at night. At some point, out of the corner of my eye, I saw two men quickly crossing the street. They got in front of us and stopped us, and it was at this moment I realized they were the same men I saw looking at me earlier. My heart jumped. One guy was slightly buff, but the other was quite skinny, both in their mid-30s. Once they were fully blocking our way, they asked us to take photos of them. Alarms started blaring in my head. We were at least 10 minutes from the beach, so they shouldn't have seen us taking photos of other people there. What would make them rush across the street and ask us to do something like that with no context? I felt like screaming no, but my friend, who had never seen these guys before, agreed. It was annoyingly common for her to be like that, super kind and people-pleasing. I just smiled and nodded at the guys. They were eerily emotionless. They kept a deadpan face as they spoke, betraying the fake niceness in their voices. While my friend was taking photos of them doing various poses, I watched awkwardly. They kept looking over at me instead of the camera, never showing a single hint of emotion no matter what position they were in. It was like they were living mannequins. When the mini photo shoot was done, the skinny guy placed his hat on my friend's head. She laughed and thanked him, but it made my stomach churn as I now knew this was going to go further than just photos. Just as I suspected, the men suggested we get drinks together, still not smiling in the slightest. I elbowed my friend to tell her we should get out of this, but she ignored me. Instead, she actually cheered and said she was really thirsty, giving these robotic men her most enthusiastic excitement. It was so insane that I felt dizzy, even though I had told her the cafe we were headed to was open. The men lied and claimed that it was too late, so only bars would be open. This was when I finally butted in and said we were too young to drink, which was true. The buff guy just laughed and said it didn't matter because he would buy drinks for us, but I couldn't even think of a response to that. I just stood there with a look of shock and dread on my face. And that fear, that show of helplessness, was what finally made their facade start to crack. A smirk spread across the thinner man's face, sending shivers down my spine. I grabbed my friend by the wrist and started begging her to leave, whispering that this all just felt wrong. My friend and I had a sidebar conversation at that moment, and while she was stupidly saying it would be fine, the two men kept trying to convince us to go. They even started to move closer to us, and then one of them gripped my shoulder, silencing me mid-sentence. I turned my head in horror and saw the most gut-wrenching sight of my life. The buff man had grabbed a hold of me, and in his other hand, hidden at his waist, was a knife. My instincts took over. I still had my friend by the wrist, so I just bolted. I felt the man's grip on my shoulder tighten, almost hard enough to hold me back, but I barely managed to slip away. I hadn't screamed or anything. I just grabbed my friend and ran. Then I didn't stop until I dragged her into a more populated area. I think if I had wasted the breath, we wouldn't have gotten away. But this left my airheaded friend confused and pissed at me. She just couldn't get it through her head that those guys were bad news. Even as we were getting into a cab, so we didn't have to leave on foot, I pointed the men out to her. They were still watching us from across the street, just like they were from the start, and probably had been all evening. I could still see the glint of metal in the larger man's hand, but my friend refused to believe he was holding a weapon, claiming it was probably just his phone. This story was what made me stop talking to that friend. She thought I was over-exaggerating and said I was being annoying by mentioning it so much. I might have saved her life, and she can't even say thanks. To think she's out there, navigating the world on her own. It's a wonder how she's still alive. In early 2020, I was stuck at home under quarantine like everyone else. I lived alone, so I was lonely and bored for most of it. One day, the loneliness finally got the better of me, and I decided to try a dating app for the first time. I made my account over breakfast, uploading 10 or so of the best pictures I had of me at the time. Afterwards, I went to the living room and sat on the couch and started swiping through the app. It seemed like a lot of people had the same idea as me, so there was a ton of activity, and it didn't take long to match with several guys. I noticed one of the messages I got from a blank profile saying, "Sup, it says you're close. Wanna come over?" I clicked on his profile. He had no pictures, no age or status. So I replied asking if he had any pictures. He sent back 2 images. He was an old white guy in his 40s or 50s, with a long beard. He was very hairy and creepy looking, almost old enough to be my dad. I had no experience with dating apps, but I want to always be respectful and clear if I'm not interested in someone. I responded to his images with a text letting him know I was sorry, but he wasn't my type, so I wasn't interested. Honestly, I thought he would just block me, but he replied with a message that left me speechless. He sent me a screenshot of my house on Google Earth and typed my exact address. Then he blocked me seconds after I saw it. It was really frightening, but I told myself I was just being paranoid and laughed it off. Then I took a shower to reset. About 20 minutes later, I came out of the shower and saw I had 10 missed calls from an unknown number, along with 1 voicemail. I figured I was being prank called by my friends, as it was something they would do. I played the voicemail, but I only heard random muffled sounds for a few seconds. I brushed it off, then I went to lay in bed. As I opened the dating app again, there was a message from another blank profile that said, "Look outside." Before I could even click on the profile, they blocked me, and the message disappeared again. I panicked and shot out of bed to peek through my blinds at my bay window, but there was nobody out there. I kept staring, expecting to see someone. Then I realized my phone was ringing again. It was the same unknown caller spam calling me. I got agitated and picked up, but nobody responded to me on the other side. All I heard was someone breathing slow and heavy. Then after about 10 seconds, they hung up. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and put it down to watch some TV in bed. A while later, I grabbed my phone out of curiosity. I thought there was no way they would try to call again, but as it turned out, I had 20 more missed calls from them, and they were still going. It was about 2 a.m, so this was getting to be really annoying. When they called again, I answered just so I could cuss them out and tell them to stop calling me. This time, I could hear something from the other end of the call, and it made every hair on my body stand on end. It sounded exactly what was playing on my TV right in front of me, only delayed by a few seconds. I froze, horrified that the caller might be hiding in my room. Then, for the first time, I heard a voice on the other end. It said, "Look outside again." At this point, I thought I was losing my mind. When I gathered the courage, with my blanket wrapped around me, I crept up to my closet and flung the door open. There was nobody in it. Next, I checked under my bed. Nobody there either. Finally, I went over to my window facing the backyard. I cracked the blinds and looked outside, and there was a man standing on the patio. He was holding a phone and staring directly up at me. Fear took over my body. I screamed and ran into my bathroom, locking the door and jamming a rug underneath it. I called the police, begging for help. I told them what was happening, and in an act so disrespectful it made me lose my faith in humanity. They didn't show up for 2 hours. It felt like days. When they finally came, the guy was no longer there. The cops said there was nothing they could do. They basically blamed me for the whole thing, too, saying I brought it on myself by being on a dating app, as if I signed up to have strangers find out everything about me when I downloaded it. Irritated beyond belief, I sent them out since they were no help at all. I was a paranoid wreck for weeks after that, always expecting to see that freak again, never being able to believe that it was over. I still think about that man whenever someone mentions dating apps. I certainly never intend to use one ever again.
I was a little kid when this happened. I lived in a small town in England, and we didn't have a cinema for quite a while. So when one opened, it was a novelty, and my mom would take me a lot. It's different now, and it's been expanded, but back then there were 5 screens, 3 larger ones and then 2 small ones down towards the end of the building and down a long corridor, and then a thinner corridor spanned off from that, leading to the 2 bathrooms, men's and women's. So I forget which film we were there to see, but this was before the film started. I needed to use the bathroom, but I had a drink and popcorn and I didn't want to take them into the bathroom with me. Mom was chatting to a friend who worked at the cinema, so I was just hanging out at the start of the corridor leading to the bathrooms, waiting impatiently. Just to clarify, though, I was maybe 7 here, so hanging around outside the bathrooms didn't make me look like a weirdo. I'm there waiting for Mom to show up, eating little bits of popcorn while I wait, when I see him. A huge tall guy in a long waxed raincoat. I'm not sure if they're popular in the States, but here when I was a kid they were called yuppie coats in my area. Very dark green long raincoats made of thick canvas materials. I guess rich people originally wore them, but now they were just typical outdoor coats. So this guy was wearing that and had longish hair, and he looked maybe in his 50s or older, and now I'll just reiterate here, this was back in the 90s, so it was before the popularity of gender fluidity and non-binary identities and whatnot. If you were trans, then you dressed, often as a requirement for gender-affirming treatment, as the gender you wanted to be. Not my words, just trying to explain it. And the point is, this was a man. He was not making any attempts to appear as anything but a man. And he walked straight down the bathroom corridor and into the ladies' toilets. I knew something felt very wrong about this, so I kept watching the door, and thankfully Mom showed up seconds later. I told her what I'd seen, and she immediately went to get a cinema employee. During this time, I did not move from my spot looking down the corridor. If this man had left the ladies' room, I would have seen him. So Mum gets back with the female cinema employee who goes into the bathroom, and she comes out a few minutes later looking at me strangely. There was no tall, hefty guy in a raincoat here. In fact, there was nobody in the bathroom at all. It was entirely empty. She asked me if maybe I'd been mistaken and he'd gone into the men's. I said I didn't think so. She knocked on the men's and then called in, and when there was no answer, opened the door, and the men's bathroom was empty too. She asked me if there was any chance that the man had left the bathroom in the meantime, and I assured her that it was totally, utterly impossible, and I meant it. I don't know for sure what happened that day. What I do know is that I 100% definitely saw a large man go into the ladies' bathroom, and then the bathroom was empty the next time someone went into it. I am certain that he didn't leave through the door, or realize that he'd gone into the wrong bathroom and switched to the men's. I was watching intently because the whole thing obviously creeped me out. What I do know, though, is that a couple of years later, the part of the ceiling of the cinema collapsed while people were in one of the screens watching a movie. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but it turned out there was a huge amount of space at the top of the building that spanned most of the area, and that it hadn't been constructed very well, apparently, since it eventually collapsed. I know I saw a large, creepy-looking guy go into that bathroom, and I know he then disappeared. My theory is that he somehow knew how to get into the crawl space through a ceiling vent, and then went off and did something. What and why, I don't know. It's either that or my local cinema, which is still there to this day, albeit very much refurbished and higher quality, with a fixed ceiling, is haunted by the ghost of a large man who hangs around the bathrooms. And honestly, I don't know which theory I prefer. His name was Sean, and I met him on Tinder. I won't say it was love at first sight. It took a bit of cajoling from him to get me to agree to a date. He wasn't really my type. Kinda looked like he loved himself, a tall and buff guy. I'm usually into slightly pudgier guys who, well, I'm sure you don't care about that. But trust me, fellas, women who like normal guys are out there. And Sean won me over with a sense of humor, his smooth talking, and his absolute geekery. I'm a big Marvel fan, or, well, I was back then anyway, and I went to all the movies in the theater on opening weekend whenever possible. I was also really big into horror, especially the Conjuring universe, so Sean eventually won me over by inviting me to go with him to see The Nun. Hey, the movies are a pretty easy place for a first date. If it's going badly, you can just sort of shift away in your seat and ignore the other person for the duration of the film. He picked me up at a nearby Starbucks. Don't give random Tinder dates your address, people. And we drove to the theater. And honestly, he was great. Really charming, fun, and generally a good time. He knew his movies too. A nerd in a sort of cute way, which is basically just to say that he's a nerd. Now the one problem was, he was fairly pessimistic about the prospects for The Nun. I'll give him this. He ended up being right. Man, that movie sucked. And let's not even mention the sequel, but this isn't about that. Sean was certain that the first movie was going to suck, even though we were going on opening night, and he was promising me that he had something in mind that would make the experience way more memorable, quote-unquote. Well, here we go, I was thinking. He's going to make sure that we get seats in the back row, and I'm going to be in for an evening of dodging make-out attempts and groping hands. Still, I wasn't too dissuaded by the former, at least. If only that's what Sean had planned, though. We grabbed our tickets and some popcorn and even a hot dog. Sean was against the idea of buying a drink, though. According to him, needing to leave the theater to use the bathroom ruined any movie. I mean, I guess I could buy that. I did miss a key scene in The Dark Knight thanks to a bathroom break, but it is a bit psychotic with salty popcorn. And sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row. We'd arrived very early for the showing, and it was one of those small-town theaters where you just kind of chose whatever seats were available. He led us down the aisle of the back row until we were basically in the middle looking down at the screen. It was a prime spot, in fairness, and I was fine with the seating arrangement. We sat there making small talk, laughing at the ads, and then watching the trailers quietly like good moviegoers should. Then the lights dimmed, Sean finished his hot dog and he positioned the popcorn between us, and our hands brushed a couple of times as we shared the salted goodness, and I even felt a bit of a spark there. The movie started off not too bad. I was kind of enjoying it, honestly. Thaisa Farmiga can win me over very easily. But Sean, however, was not enjoying it. He kept nudging me, making whispered comments about how crappy it was and how it could use some extra scares. I mostly just ignored him because, honestly, I was enjoying it and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And then he told me to look down. At the same time, I felt something prodding into my side. Sean was sitting on my left, and other than an elderly couple at the end of the row on the right, we had the whole line to ourselves. I looked down. Sean was holding the biggest hunting knife I had ever seen, and the tip of it was very slightly pressed into my side. I remember his words like it was yesterday. "Move, or call for help, or do anything, and the blade goes in," he said. "Just keep watching the movie." And so we did. And throughout, he kept making goofy remarks and joking comments as if he didn't have a huge knife held against me. And I was absolutely trembling, terrified and speechless with fear almost. At times I had to stifle back sobs as I replied to his inane jibes at the movie. At this point, I had no idea if he'd lose his mind in anger if I disagreed with him calling the movie garbage or something. I mean, it kinda was, and it got worse as it went on, but obviously I didn't really care at that point. And at that point I was just begging for it to be over. Scenarios were running through my head. What would happen when the credits rolled? Would he expect us to just walk out like nothing had happened? Would I be getting a blade to the gut? I understood now why he'd forbidden us from getting a soda. Not only could it have required me to get up, but it would have improved the chances of me actually pissing myself in fear. I genuinely cannot express to you the terror of sitting there for 90 minutes with a blade gently pushing into the soft flesh of my stomach. I wanted to do something. I knew if I called out for help, he'd be able to gut me before I could receive so much as a look of concern from fellow moviegoers. And then, thank God, the movie was over. We sat there for a moment, and the credits were rolling, and the knife was still pressing into me. The theater lights went up, and that's when I saw it. It was a literal prop knife. Now, before you think I'm some idiot, it was a professional-level movie prop, I'll be honest. He must have paid top dollar for it, and I could only tell because in the light I could see the official Rob Zombie's Halloween movie branding on the handle. I guess it explained how he held it steady enough that it felt like it could penetrate me at any moment, but never did. And Sean was grinning at me like he'd just given me the world's best treat. "There, didn't I make a terrible movie a hell of a lot scarier?" he said. When he saw the absolute murderous rage on my face, I could tell he was genuinely surprised. This idiot, this moron idiot jackass, had genuinely believed that just because I was a horror fan, I'd be delighted and grateful at him causing me one of the worst hours of my entire life. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I know it was far too obscene to share on this channel, and I also know it resulted in me throwing the rest of the popcorn straight in his smug, idiot face. And most of it was still untouched due to me fearing for my life. I stormed straight out of that movie theater, told the manager, who was a friend of mine, and obviously was advised to call the cops. There was barely a charge in response, something to do with causing undue stress, but due to the stupid way the laws worked at the time, the low lighting didn't make the charge worse, and the fact that it was an obvious toy made it harder to push for anything more serious. I did make sure to press charges, but he ended up getting off with some slap on the wrist. Thankfully, a very sympathetic judge granted me a restraining order, not that I think I had any danger of hearing from Sean again, and in his eyes, I was the crazy, hysterical woman who couldn't handle being an actual horror fan, all because I wasn't cool with having to spend the duration of that movie thinking that I was going to get stabbed to death. And so, Sean, screw you. I hope the possessed doll of Annabelle eats you in your sleep. So some years ago, I worked as a cleaner at a local, reasonably large theater in my city. Things weren't as bad back then as they are now, but Holy gosh darn, even back before the old Rona, theatergoers were just filthy animals. And sometimes it was fine, but on an average Friday night showing, I'd spend hours cleaning up copious amounts of popcorn, spilled soda, candy, and chocolate wrappers, melted chocolate bars, all sorts. And sometimes it would be things that we didn't even sell. I once found a seat stuck together by a full, untouched bologna sandwich, and I swear I'd watch the theatergoers head into the movie, and there would be more food to clean up than they took with them in the first place. And that was the good times. You don't even know what the amount of vile, unspeakable things that I had to scrub away with the aid of rubber gloves, a hard-bristled brush, and industrial-strength detergent. Let's just say, people are disgusting, yo. I guess it came as a shock at first, 'cause my mama raised me right and good and taught me to clean up after my own damn self. And we also grew up poor, and me and my mother and younger brother Tyrell, so if I bought a hot dog, then I was damn well gonna eat that hot dog, not just squash it into a cup holder. Now, believe it or not though, the disgusting hygiene and cleanliness of others isn't the point of this scary story. It's about one night when I was working very late. I think it was a midnight showing of Hereditary. Midnight showings at our theater actually meant that it hit midnight around the halfway point, so by the time the movie was done and everyone had filed out, I was there to clean up close to 2 a.m. Thankfully, it didn't seem too chaotic. I went about my business with my trash bag, my little grabby claw, and my bucket on wheels filled with the usual equipment. And so movie theaters get lit up after a movie's been shown, right? Well, in our movie theater anyways, after a midnight showing, they just kind of kept the lights dim. I guess they were just too cheap to give the poor cleaning girl full clear vision, who knows. But I was cool with it. I'd caught the tail end of the movie and it gave me the spook, so I was kind of enjoying the atmosphere of a half-lit movie theater as I went about cleaning up. Then movement caught my eye. Something sort of skittering across the aisle near the front, from one row to the other side. And I say this like a spider, but it was the size of a human being. Like someone had rapidly crawled from one side of row C to the other. Anyone there? I called out, praying to the Lord above that there wouldn't be a reply. And there wasn't, of course. There must have been my imagination, I guess, so I just went back to cleaning. And then, no mistaking it, rustling from near aisle E, the sound of popcorn crunching underfoot, and I'd know that sound anywhere. What the hell should I do, I thought. I had no idea who was left in that theater that late at night, and for all I knew, it was just me and our old-ass manager. I heard a sound from across the theater. It was hard to tell in the gloom, but it looked like someone had thrown a soda cup across the room. Then, while my gaze was pointed in that direction, a shadow darted over the seats near the front of the screen. More crunching sounds, and then suddenly silence. I began to creep slowly as I could toward the exit door, and for a moment, I thought I'd screwed myself when my shoe got stuck on some sticky soda spill, and I grabbed the sheet, shaking it somewhat. There was silence, and I made it almost to the exit. And then I heard more skittering lower down the room. I stayed very still, waiting, pretending like I'd left. A shape crawled along the aisle, and this time I saw them very clearly. It was a person, a thin, emaciated-looking person dragging themselves commando-style across the aisle. Oh, hell no. Hell to the no. I wasn't sticking around for this. I'm just gonna back out real slowly, I called out into the darkness. But a voice spoke back. I have no idea what she said. It was in a language that I honestly couldn't really tell what it was, and it didn't sound threatening though, almost scared. I called out asking if the person was okay, but no reply. But I could hear them moving around and it sounded like they were getting closer, and I didn't like that. My plan was to leave and call the cops, but then that figure, the person, fully leaped over the seats, hurtling forward over the next aisle too, leaping straight for me. They were yelling something I couldn't understand, but they didn't sound scared anymore. I kind of froze, not sure which direction to go. Right would lead me to the aisle and let me leave the theater, but in the half-darkness, this figure charging at me, leaping over chairs, I was not thinking straight. When she was just an aisle away, I saw that she was some Caucasian girl, looked like a teenager. She had short, filthy blonde hair, her face was dirty, and she had ketchup and mustard smeared around her mouth. This young white lady had been crawling around eating the vile leftovers off the theater floor. It's funny how your mind acts in a pinch, because my immediate thought was pity for this hungry, emaciated teenager, and like I said, I grew up poor and I sympathized. But my moment of empathy caused me to freeze, and she leaped over the final aisle and was on top of me. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. I think she just hadn't understood me and wanted to make sure that she could escape without me somehow restraining her. But still, she threw me back against the seat hard, and I heard my spine even crack in a way that made me wince. Now don't worry, I'm fine. It was just kind of like cracking a knuckle, as it turns out. And then this chick was sort of shaking me, spit flying onto my face. She's kind of yelling, sort of begging in whatever language she was talking in, and so I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed her head with both my hands and turned her face toward a whole pile of popcorn on the floor and just yelled, "Eat it," hoping that she'd get the point that I was just going to let her. And she did. She jumped off of me, went toward that popcorn, and just began pouring it into her own face. Now, this psycho had scared me, but I didn't have it in my heart to get some teenage runaway busted by the cops. And maybe this was a dumb idea, but you hear about young girls running away like this for a good reason, and then end up being sent back to places that ruin them forever. So I let her eat for a minute, and then just kind of poked her gently with my trash grabber claw. "Hey, you gotta go," I told her, gesturing at the exit door at the back which led outside. She starts shaking her head and just kept shoveling that popcorn into her mouth. "Boss is gonna be here any minute, you gotta go," I said, gesturing again, hoping she understood enough English to at least comprehend what I was saying. And I guess she did, because she takes one final scoop of popcorn and then just starts running towards the exit door. And it was only later that I realized how much damn danger I just put myself in and how potentially stupid I'd been in that moment. I never told anyone about this incident, but I had nightmares about it for weeks. Only in those nightmares, she wasn't some harmless girl from Eastern Europe or wherever she was from. She was a demon crawling between the aisles, eating its way through the seats. I'm pretty sure I even saw her again once. It was a couple of years later, shortly before I left the theater to move on to bigger, better things. And she was there on, I guess, a date? The guy she was with, he didn't look like a good kind of person, not at all. And I guess you shouldn't just judge a book by its cover, but he gave me really bad vibes. And to this day, I wonder if he was someone that she met on the streets or someone she'd been sent back home to. All I know is cleaning movie theaters at night can be a freaking terrifying thing. I see the TikToks and the YouTube shorts of the way people leave things, and I just sort of laugh because, girls, if that's as bad as it gets for you, then you're lucky. Because I learned that day, sometimes there's more to be afraid of than finding a squished hot dog in your theater aisle.